Hello everyone, today we're using a washcloth to make a primitive soap saver pocket. We're going to use this to make like a little bag, and we're going to use this little bag to stuff your little pieces of soap that you don't really want to use anymore, but you don't want them to go to waste either. So you just collect a bunch of little pieces of soap in here, and you water it down, and you scrub it, and you can reuse your little pieces of soap that you normally would just toss away. So the first thing you need to start making this is a washcloth. You need a ruler, you need something to mark your fabric with, you need Velcro, and you also need scissors, and of course you need a sewing machine to make this project. So this washcloth is 12 inches in width, and I want to try to get two pockets out of it, so I'm going to cut it in half. So this is 12 inches. I'm going to make a mark at the 6-inch line. And I'm just trying to make a line that's as straight as possible for myself to cut on so that this comes out perfectly in half. And of course we are going to want to cut off this little tag. So now that I have a straight line, it doesn't look quite straight, but that is the halfway point. Measure it one at a time to make sure. That is the middle. And when you cut your Velcro pieces, ideally you want it to be close to almost the same width as the edge of your pocket. I made to make sure this was a little bit less than 6 inches, just so that it's not all the way to the edges, because I do have to sew the edges when I sew this together. I will be sewing the edges together, so I didn't want it to be too bulky at the edges, and so I did make this a little bit shorter. And I do not want the Velcro on top of this trim, so I'm going to place it below the trim. And so when I open it up, it's going to come out. I'll have these two pieces of trim that I can pull on, and that should make it much easier. this project I'm using contrasting colors so that it's a little bit easier for you guys to see what I'm doing, but normally I would recommend using a thread that matches your washcloth so it's not too visible, and if you do make any mistakes, hopefully it wouldn't be very noticeable. So for this project, and because I want it to be sturdy, I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. So I think I'm going to use this one, which I already have on here. And feel free to go over it twice, maybe even 3 times, just to make sure it's going to really stake on there. Because this is going to receive a lot of wear and tear. And I do not want to be sewing right here on top of my trim because that is a very thick piece of fabric, and so I'm going to sew right down here so that's not too bulky. Alright, I'm gonna get ready to start sewing, but one more time I wanted to share that this stitch that I'm going to use. Doesn't have to be this stitch, but I recommend using a sturdy zigzag stitch and doing it more than once so that it's secure for your pocket. And I do recommend having your stitches a little bit closer to each other, and the width could be a little bit bigger. Oh, it's as big as it can get. So this should be a very large and sturdy stitch to use for your washcloth. Now, if you're a beginner sewer, or even if you're an experienced sewer, I recommend just doing a little bit at a time because Velcro can be tricky, and using a thick washcloth fabric makes it easy to slip around and mess up. And so I definitely recommend going slow with this part and taking your time and making sure you're taking the time to adjust when necessary. Now we're going to pivot. So you leave the needle in your fabric and then you're going to turn it around and continue sewing. And we're going to pivot one more time. Now I do want it to be a little bit closer than that, so I'm going to take it out, take the needle out, and adjust it to where I want it. And then begin sewing again. I'm taking my time, just doing a few sections at a time, making sure it's straight and it's exactly where I want it to be. Excuse me. this scenario, what happened here was my needle was unthreaded while sewing, so I had to just rethread that really quick. My sewing machine doesn't work very well, so I have to hand thread it. Pivot one more time. I'm going to go over the stitches that I stitched already. So here's the finished product, and it looks very nice and secure. And we have this lovely little zigzag design on the back of our washcloth. And hopefully once the finished product is done, it should look like something like that. Also, we would have stitching along the edges, loop stitching. Now I just need to do what I did here to this side, and then it'll be ready. So in my case, I am just eyeballing it, but if you want to be a little more exact, I would recommend measuring this here. So for here, it's like it's a quarter of an inch from the top. So I'll make sure I do it a quarter of an inch from the top and here as well. I'm just going to mark that. pivot again. Now I'm going to go over the stitches I sewed before, just to act as a back stitching. This should hopefully make it even more secure. Now if you're using a smaller zigzag or a zigzag that is less secure, I'd recommend going all the way around, definitely twice. But I think for me this is secure enough, and it's going to hold my Velcro in place, and I don't think it's going to come out, so I think I'm good here. So now that I have the Velcro on, all I'm going to do is put this together. A little bit more even. I'm just going to sew the edges, and then we'll have a little bag. So first I'm going to sew it, this is the inside of my bag, and I'm going to put right sides together and sew here and here, and then when I flip it over we should have clean looking edges that hopefully that should not fray, because we're using a zigzag, and the zigzag should hopefully secure the fabric so it does not fray on you and it will last a long time. Now this part's going to be a little tricky because it is much thicker, so I recommend going very slow and not hurting your machine too badly in this section. I recommend having your needle come around and not even hit your fabric when it should hopefully hug these sides together if you sew along the edge this way, and that should keep it very sealed. Here, when I finish this, I'll show you the way the stitching is hugging the fabrics, these two pieces of fabric together. And this is because I'm sewing along the edge. I recommend pivoting slightly here just to make sure you're getting this corner. You see here the stitching hugged the edge, and so that should be secure. That should secure it even better. If you don't feel that your stitching is as secure as you would like it to be, I'd definitely recommend going a second time. And this part's going to be tricky because it is quite thick. So I recommend going very slow to not hurt your machine. And if you're scared, if you're worried you're going to hurt your machine, I'd recommend hand sewing, but make sure you use a secure stitching when you hand sew so that it stays. And this is our finished product, and we're sewed secure all the way around. Turn it inside out. Now you have an adorable little soap saver pocket. Stick your soap in there and then put it in your bath. So there's your finished product. And let's say you had a bar of soap, you could stick it in there. And you scrub it, and then you can wash yourself with it. Shower. You can also start putting like little pieces of soap. Let's say you had a tiny piece of soap that you didn't want to give away yet. Stick it in there. You stick a bunch of them in there, and then you can still keep using them. And you just save this in your shower.